There we go. So the meeting is now being recorded, and we're going to launch into our presentations with Giles going first. So Giles, you should be able to share your screen.
Give it a go. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Thanks very much, Paul. Greetings, everybody. Nice to see a couple of old friends, Mark Rebstock, Julie Morris. Hope you're both doing well. And nice to meet everyone else. So this is really a pitch about the new Diplomatic History Network and what's new about it. I mean, as I'm sure some of you will agree, there's always a problem if you claim something is new, because at a certain point it's no longer new. But for the moment, it's serving its purpose. And on the screen before you, you have the website of the new Diplomatic History Network. This was the website is only a couple of years old, but the network was set up by a group of youngish historians about 7-8 years ago who felt that the field of diplomatic history needed to be pepped up a bit, that there was a sense that diplomatic history in some corners of academia had kind of run its course. Transnational history, global history, international history were far more sexy and interesting. And who wants to talk about diplomats? That's boring and passé. So there was a sense that this is not really reflecting some of the more innovative work coming through in the field. And that's really what I wanted to talk a bit about today. So I'm going to start with an example from my own work to give you a sense of what this is about in one particular field. The gentleman before you is Ernst van Eegen. He was a Dutch businessman, led a family firm that had been going since the 17th century, and he took it over as the eldest son in the 1950s or so. And it is a remarkable company that it has always been passed down from father to son for about 350 years. So he's standing outside the minister-president's office of the Dutch government in March 1985, having just dropped by to talk to the Dutch minister-president about the very irrelevant topic of the placement of American cruise missiles on Dutch soil. I came across this meeting in a history of Dutch politics on cruise missiles, and the book, about 400 pages long, devoted a page and a half to this man who just turned up and with a message from the Kremlin for the Dutch government on the issue of nuclear disarmament. So I started getting very intrigued, and I found that he had very close relations indeed at the very heart of the Soviet power structure. Not so much the foreign ministry, they were more suspicious of him, but he would bypass the Soviet foreign ministry and go straight to the seat of power. Likewise, in the United States, the Department of State regarded him as a bit of a troublemaker, someone who was getting in the way of their top-level negotiations. But he nevertheless was able to bypass them through his links with the US Congress. And the Dutch Foreign Ministry as well. They had files on him. They were very curious what he was up to in Moscow, but at no point did they really reach out to him to make use of him in terms of their own traditional diplomacy. So the more you look, the more his role, identity, and purpose in diplomatic terms becomes difficult to identify. Obviously, the KGB was interested in him. There is a certain element here that maybe he was part of an information operation on the part of the Soviet Union. To a certain extent, almost, certainly likely. But the CIA, of course, were interested in him as well. And he does crop up in CIA reports on peace moves in Europe at the time. But then it gets more complex. He had a one-on-one relationship with the Russian Orthodox Patriarch Alexei II, which means he could go right to the top of Russian religious power. He had a very friendly relationship with Senator Sam Nunn, so he could go to the very heart of deliberations in the US Congress. And he was very close to the well-known peace activist and NGO leader Landrum Bolling. who had a lot of experience working with the Carters in the Middle East and had a very kind of profound understanding of how a citizen could operate at the highest levels of diplomacy. So the more you look at Van Eycken, the more he doesn't fit any clear model. Yet he's clearly involved in some kind of diplomacy. So with that as background, one can really sum up new diplomatic history as being the merging of the social science methods of diplomatic studies with the archival-based work of diplomatic history. And this really flows out along two broad paths. One is a reevaluation of diplomats themselves, traditional diplomats in embassies going about their work, and basically reevaluating the entire activity and behavior of traditional diplomacy using new tools such as prosopography, the whole kind of social network of diplomats and how they operate in a particular host country. The importance of sites such as embassies, where they're located, what the architecture is, how are they open or closed, the whole materiality of diplomacy in terms of objects, gifts, and how they play into ritual of diplomatic occasions as well. And then on the other side, expanding who are the diplomats, and really kind of starting to move beyond the idea of simply the ambassador and the official team based in the embassy to look at a wider array of activities and individuals who are clearly playing some kind of diplomatic role, but are falling outside of traditional understanding of that. And I add a few here: mediators and private peace entrepreneurs from Leo Les, who's also joining us tonight in the audience, CEOs, NGOs, etc. So it's really that reevaluating the traditional idea of the diplomat and expanding the scope of diplomacy. So I can continue with trying to explain what we're about by using the well-known idea of multi-track diplomacy developed by John MacDonald, aimed at conflict resolution. And he came up with the famous list of track 1 to 9, with track 1 being, of course, government officials, traditional diplomacy, track 2 being the use of private actors in the interests of traditional diplomacy, and then moving from there through a whole array of private groups from civil society who in one way or another get involved in the diplomatic process, or may not. But of course, it's very hierarchical. Number 1 to 9, there is a sense that the state still calls the shots. MacDonald, with his collaborator Diamond, developed the idea of the compass, and this was really around their idea of, if you want to achieve conflict resolution, you need to basically focus the interests and the activities of all 9 partners towards some specific goal. That's obviously their purpose. But we can look at this in other terms, in terms of diplomacy outside of conflict resolution. What we generally see in terms of understanding, and particularly in a lot of historical writing, is if you start mixing up the hierarchy, the state is still number 1. There is still this very heavy reliance on state sources, archives, representatives, memoirs, oral histories, that's really the source of the story. And then you've got these walk-on players who may or may not contribute something at some time. And that was exactly how Ernst van Eycken was presented in this book on the cruise missile crisis in the Netherlands. He just cropped up just at this one particular moment, but there was no real interest in who the hell this guy was delivering messages from the Kremlin. And that was exactly what intrigued me. So we can go a step further and mix it up so that there is no clear guiding line. That obviously the official diplomacy is still playing a part, but from a new diplomatic history perspective, you cannot say in every single instance or location or meeting, etc., that it is paramount. That we're looking at a much more multi-directional, multi-participation model of diplomacy, where the lines between official and unofficial, formal and informal, are becoming blurred. Now, of course, this is not necessarily new. This was really first pitched back in the 60s and 70s. Some social scientists and historians were already playing around with this idea. But the idea of really moving away from a kind of traditional understanding and identity of diplomacy, of course, has developed quite a bit of resistance in the field, because the main argument that we hear is, okay, if you do this, then absolutely everything is diplomacy, and absolutely everyone is a diplomat. A bit like Joseph Beuys saying everyone is an artist if they can hold a pencil. So to give another idea, the focus is much more on process over result. A very traditional diplomatic history approach would be, for instance, here, the Washington Treaty that set up NATO in April 1949 would be on the treaty and the signatures and the officialness of this as a foundation stone for NATO. What new diplomatic history would do would consider this in terms of what happened behind those signatures. Were there any kind of particular friendships or social networks built into those names and those scribbles on this page? What was the role of figures outside of the diplomatic network who brought people together, who facilitated dialogue, who maybe made use of the media to push a certain line or oppose another line? In other words, the whole broad tapestry that led to these signatures ending up on this particular page. And that for us is as much diplomacy as the actual factual result of the treaty. To move on to another example, which I quite like, is the consul. Now, this is an interesting one because, of course, the development of diplomacy through the centuries saw a very, very important role for consuls. Consuls were really the first representatives of one particular social group or national group in the location of another. And of course, in the early days, they were often private citizens, often some kind of traders or business interests who were taking on the mantle of a diplomatic identity for a particular purpose, and that was sanctioned. And it was only through the development of the nation state through the 18th and 19th century where consuls started to be pushed down the hierarchy to become some kind of secondary diplomatic status within the traditional hierarchies of a nation state diplomatic apparatus. But the consul basically represents that kind of blurred dividing line between private and public, formal and informal, and no greater than the identity of the honorary consul, who is, of course, a private citizen who adopts the mantle of, if you like, diplomacy for a particular state, but is quite free to go about their own personal affairs alongside that.
Giles, you've got 3 minutes.
No problem. I'm almost done, Paul. So really, this is my last slide. This is really the impulse for us to establish the journal Diplomatica, a journal of diplomacy and society. And the subtitle is really the key here. We're trying to merge the understanding of diplomacy as an element within wider social relations and power relations. And the one thing I want to close with here is that there is a tendency in the literature to see this as a typical result of globalization. Through globalization, we have increasing role of NGOs, of corporations, that they're starting to increasingly edge into the areas of governance formerly dominated by the nation state. And that, of course, has also fallen over into diplomacy as well. So we see the CEO of Google flying around the world like some kind of pseudo diplomat. But our point is that has been going on through history, that it's a mistake to assume that in the modern era, the nation state has dominated diplomacy and that everything else is simply secondary or peripheral or not interesting. That there are always, in the era of diplomacy, other actors who are always playing a role, always contributing, always facilitating. And that's exactly where we try to put our emphasis. And that's, for instance, coming back to the example I used of Ernst van Eege. He is more than a footnote. There's a much bigger story going on there. And if you don't address that, then you're actually missing a major part of the diplomacy of, say, the Netherlands in the late part of the Cold War. So that's my pitch. Thank you very much, Paul.
Awesome, Giles. Thank you. So please hold off on your questions or comments. You can, however, if you'd like, start to pose your questions or make your comments in the chat. But we're going to proceed to Linda Staley, and I think I'm mispronouncing her last name, who is going to be presenting on Global Collab. Oh, and you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, great. Thanks, Paul. And guys, that was a fascinating presentation. I look forward to asking questions. Okay, my name is Linda. Let's see if I can share my screen.
Yep.
Okay. And I will,
Just click the present button.
yeah, I'm just trying to get to it here. Okay, great. Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm with the Global Collab Network, an NGO that I founded about 6 years ago, and this is our website. And I am going to give a little short overview of this and our work. Let's see. So my background is building global science collaboration. So it's really science diplomacy that I worked on for 25 years at the State Department, the White House, NIH, number of places, connecting scientists to address global challenges. And I left in 2015 because I was frustrated in part with sort of the silos and the challenges of building more effective collaborations across disciplines and looking at these grand challenges that are so complex and interdisciplinary. So I created the CoLab, and the CoLab really was initially focused on bringing together people in small gatherings. We use living room gatherings to build trust, which is a foundation of collaboration, to meet to talk about very specific issues. And over time, we decided to focus on empowering youth. So that became the focus. And the goal there being to connect younger people with established networks to amplify their voices, younger people being 13 to 35, because it's their future, it's them that will be leading the future efforts in the world in terms of our challenges. So we, over 4 years, started bringing people together in these small gatherings, had about 50 of them, mostly in my living room, on a whole range of topics, from mental health to North Korea to female empowerment. And we designed a sort of template for how we approached our gatherings, a 2-hour format that sort of took people through a process. And that's now up on our website, free for anyone to download. And we created a number of initiatives that came out of those. One is we have been working with Global Ties to pilot a project to deepen relations with the IVLP program at State. That is citizen exchange circles. And you can go to our website and just look a little bit about what we've been doing. But we've trained about 100 folks across the country to lead citizen exchange circles, and those are modeled on our collabs that I talked about. And the second is we had a series of discussions on North Korea because when I was working on science diplomacy for 25 years, I started a US North Korea Science Consortium. And so now we are actually in the process of building on those small gatherings that we hosted and launching a documentary that should be out in the next number of weeks on science engagement with North Korea. But the collab really is focused primarily on teenagers, in part because they are, a lot of youth programs tend to focus on 18 and older. So we decided to focus mostly on teens, and we have a primary framework that we use, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which I assume most of you are familiar with. We educate teens and teachers about the UN SDGs and then use a global video contest for teens to submit their vision of how they can make a difference on one of the SDGs. And then we bring teens together in virtual rooms and have partnered with the Smithsonian to do that. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So our goal is really to educate, empower teens, connect them with networks, and focus on action. And we really try to have as much as we can of our work be led by teens with a handful of adult mentors. We do take teens to the UN and will continue to do that after COVID. We've taken a number of delegations up there. We've hosted 7 of these global video contests, and one of our winners was an aspiring rapper from London, and he created, which is on our website, educating teens about the UN SDGs. I'm not going to play this, but I'll just give you a sense of it.
Yeah. 1, no more poverty in the streets. Let's open our hands and give, not receive. 2, 0 hunger. I believe there's enough food in the world that everyone can eat. 3, good health and well-being.
So we use a lot of art and music to engage youth, and that's just one of the many things we have focused on. I mentioned our video contest. We're in our 7th year. In the past, we have flown our 9 winners to Washington and matched them with mentors. And then we put them in virtual rooms that are led by teens called SDG hubs. Over the 7 years, we've engaged over 700 teens from 37 countries. And like I say, each of them gets prize money, but the goal is really for them to become activists in our hubs. So this year, we got, I think, 160 submissions this year, and 167. And each of the 10 winners will receive a $500 grant to start working on implementing their dream. And then in the fall, instead of flying them to Washington, which we have in the past, they will share what they have launched with their funding in a virtual gathering. So the real purpose of the collab is action. So what we decided to do is start to create these virtual rooms that are led by teens. And the Smithsonian partnered with us to really focus on their Earth Optimism Summit that they started in 2017. And they helped us launch an Eco-Teen Action Network, which are teens focused on climate change, hunger, and responsible consumption and production. But we now have, and this is our Eco-Teen Action Network, which, by the way, now our plastics hub pitched to Amazon a reusable to-go box at National Landing. We just this last month received a $25,000 grant from Amazon to launch that. So our teens are leading a project there. I'm going to go ahead and show you a short video that's about this is 2 minutes.
Hello, dreamer. Aren't you tired of endlessly searching the best organization in which you can actually make yourself heard? Search no more, because Teens Dream Collab found you. I'll lead you in our workspaces, but first, let's understand one important concept from the Teen Dream Dictionary. UN SDGs are the goals UN set for 2030. Here, in our SDGs hubs, we address these problems and design creative solutions for them. It's not just a think tank, it's a do tank. In the first years of our project, we were meeting in living rooms, but now we meet in virtual rooms.
Each of these is led by teens with an adult mentor.
You heard that right. Teens lead and get coached by mentors. But how does it actually work? Well, you sign up for an orientation meeting that happens monthly, and then, based on your interests and abilities, you will become a member of one of our hubs. We have 10 hubs right now, but you are also free to start your own hub based on one SDG goal for 2030. Every hub meets weekly and is led by a teen who prepares an agenda and guides the discussion. At the meetings, teens expose problems, design solutions, and act by starting projects. We did everything from a podcast about gender equality, art shows on guns, artworks, webinars, zero waste infographics, upcycling challenges, masks, documentary screenings, and even TikToks. We participate in contests and design solutions that solve illiteracy. We collaborate with other institutions, such as the Smithsonian, and even make collaborations between our hubs. Also, there's a video contest that gives money prizes and flies you to Washington, D.C. for an awesome celebration. And we know how to party. So what's the gain? Well, except from having the chance to meet change makers from around the globe and having a mentor to assist you in whatever project you want to work on and be part of a global movement of change, if you're still not sure how fun we are, I'll leave you with J.O., our rapper. Because yes, change can also mean awareness through rap. Join us on our next orientation meeting. You won't regret it.
And think of how they could be wiped off the map. We should be afraid, so let's take the fear and flip it to change.
Okay. So that explains our hubs. Oops.
Hello, dreamer. Aren't you tired of endlessly?
Sorry. And we meet now in virtual reality rooms. We created a virtual reality. We don't have time, but you can go on our website and actually go in and create an avatar and go into the 4 or 5 rooms that explain what we do. That's our gathering that we held. These are some of our funders and supporters, our board. And I just want to end by saying that our teams are from all over the world. Our teams that lead these efforts are from Bangladesh to Romania to Mexico, Colombia, France. We have teams from Taiwan, Nigeria, all over the world. And so I noticed a lot of you are, of course, all over the world, and many of your countries are represented in our projects. We'd love to get more teams engaged as well as mentors. So I'm done.
Great. Fantastic. Linda, thanks to both of you for your presentations. So for those of you who are new to the Citizen Diplomacy Research Group, you'll notice that those are quite different presentations. One more academic about the study of diplomacy more broadly, but the other about the actual practice. And that's exactly what we want to encourage is kind of bringing together practitioners, academics, activists, and so on to talk to each other and kind of share because to get us to talk across silos, right? And to try to cultivate a citizen diplomacy sector globally. So, so with that said, we've got basically 30 minutes. Both of you, thank you for keeping to your time. You're actually both below 15 minutes, which is awesome. So that means we have just a little bit of extra time to engage in a conversation about their 2 presentations. So feel free to pose questions, but also make comments. Who would like to start?
I have a question for Giles.
By all means.
I loved what you presented, and I wanted to ask you about, because I've spent 25 years working on science diplomacy, and wanted to get your sense of what you have, how that weaves into your history.
Yeah, that's an interesting field which has gradually been picking up some steam. I think the environmental cause is assisting with a greater interest in science diplomacy because the level of expertise required in that particular field, of course, means that you need external experts to assist the process. So it's definitely part of the story. I think you can see it both ways. One, in terms of widening the field of diplomacy through the involvement of experts. There's been some interesting work in the nuclear field, for instance, on the history of pugwash and some of these very interesting meeting points and kind of integrating scientific knowledge into the process of arms control. But on the other hand, diplomats like yourself and I don't think the full skill set of diplomats like yourself has really been reflected in a lot of the history writing. So I think those 2 directions, that kind of reevaluation, but also the widening, yeah, absolutely. So it's part of the mix, definitely.
Giles, as a follow-up to that, do you have any sense of the proportion of, and I'm obviously this would be a rough estimate on your part, but any sense of the proportion of scholars who are studying diplomacy who are currently focused on citizen diplomacy in particular?
Well, as we all know, yeah, the boundaries of what is citizen diplomacy are still quite fluid. So whether someone would specifically term themselves researching citizen diplomacy is an interesting question. So I think it's there. I mean, I would consider what I do to be citizen diplomacy, obviously, but others wouldn't, you know. So it's a label that's that is fluid. But if we take citizen diplomacy to be, yeah, the involvement of private citizens, be they individuals or groups, interest groups, in the wider diplomatic process, then I think it's a growing field. And I think what's interesting is that it's a growing field amongst young researchers who are interested in new approaches, who are looking for ways to incorporate new perspectives into the field. And some of the most interesting stuff is coming up through the PhD level and postdoc level, and we find that very encouraging. It's harder for us to convince the old hands that this is really a new development than it is to get the new crowd in. The new crowd get it completely. So let's hope for the future, which I think Linda has always also shown in her own way.
Mm-hmm. Questions and comments? Rosella.
Someone wants to go first, maybe Kalin. I saw that he raised his hand.
Oh, and I'm sorry if I
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Greetings, everyone.
Sorry, Chirunim. We've got a question. I just want to make sure to proceed in order here, and I'm sorry if you guys. You know what would be helpful is if you post your question to the chat, if you're able to. Then we can kind of go in order. But we've got a question from Arnaud. Then Chirunim. Then Rosella. So Arnaud, go ahead. You've got to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. My question is mainly for Giles. Thank you for the presentation. And of course, thanks for inviting us here. It's a great opportunity. So thank you very much for that. And it's related to, while I was looking at the slides regarding the approach of the new historical diplomacy approach, it surprised me to see that there's no mention of the local diplomacy, that is, of the international relations carried out by cities, which surprised me because diplomacy in its origins started with cities, when the Mesopotamian cities started to create ad hoc missions to kind of relate between themselves. And nowadays, these relationships are still very, very important. Of course, they cannot compete with the states in terms of influence, but we got international networks like UCLG, that they are always present in the main international summits, and they can influence those agendas. Let's take a look at the 2030 agenda. Let's take a look at the Habitat Summits, etc., etc. So my question is, what's your take? What are your thoughts on the role of the local diplomacy in those studies? Do you think that cities are taken into account when analyzing the story of diplomacy and the current role of diplomacy, or they completely ignored and it's something that we still have to kind of catch up? Thank you very much.
I know, as I think they say in the United States, my bad. I should have put it down on the list. So you're absolutely right. Cities are crucial. As you say, it's unclear whether we're moving from a state system to a more kind of city diplomacy type system. If we are, it's going to take a long time to shift. But what I would like to say is cities are a perfect example of how a non-state unit has demonstrated diplomatic behavior and practices over centuries. We're not just talking about the emergence of city networks in the late 20th and early 21st century. As you quite rightly said, you go back to the Italian city-states and further back than that. Consuls were originally linking cities rather than anything else. So what actually in the next issue of Diplomatica, we have a forum on city diplomacy through the ages, because one of our real goals is to link up let's say the modernists, the people who study diplomacy in the modern era, with the early modernists, the people who study the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, because a lot of the innovative work on diplomacy is coming from the early modernists, because that's when the nation state was not dominating the whole environment. It was a very, very fluid environment. You had all sorts of characters wandering around claiming diplomatic status. So the early modernists have a lot to teach us in that field. So you're absolutely right, and I'm quite happy to send you the material from the City Forum if you'd be interested.
Just as a reminder to everybody to mute yourself if you're not speaking. So Chirunim and then Rosella.
All right. Greetings to everyone. I am Ageto Chirunim from Nigeria. So a little contribution to the first speaker, guys. Guys, thank you for your presentation. It was really very insightful. You talked about the expanding role of diplomats to not only involve official diplomats or ambassadors, as it may be, or official envoys, but to also involve unofficial diplomats that, for example, like citizens who
wait for his connection. By the way, while we wait,
citizen diplomacy rules.
Okay. Sorry, Chirunim, we didn't hear. There was a little break in. So if we missed about 5 seconds of your question. Chirunim, you might be having issues. If you have issues with your connection, what you might do is, if you're able to, is to write your question into the chat.
All right.
You might write your question into the chat.
Okay, so is it on now?
Yeah, it's on now, but if you have trouble again, you might want to write your question.
My question is, to what extent do unofficial diplomats, to what extent do they play their roles in diplomacy as opposed to official diplomats?
Thanks, Agiotto. I don't think there's any clear answer to that. It's every situation, every diplomatic relationship is different. So in some cases, if a non-state actor can bring a certain level of expertise or connections, or finance or patronage or whatever, they may have access to particular groups which traditional diplomats do not have. If they bring something extra to the table, then they could play a very important, in some cases perhaps decisive role. But it really depends on the context. So, you know, when we're not saying, oh, this is the end of the nation state and all the embassies should close down, like some kind of, you know, Trotsky announcement. No, it's quite the opposite. We're saying it's a very, very fluid, multi-actor environment, and that is not always reflected in a lot of the writing. So that's, I hope that answers your question.
So, by the way, just as an aside, Chirunim is his first name, Agioto is his last name. But Chirunim is actually one of our family diplomacy. That's okay. He's one of our family diplomacy ambassadors with Learning Life. So I'm happy to have him here participating in the conversation from Nigeria. So Rosella.
So first of all, I wanted to thank you for the presentation. They were really, really nice. And I don't know, since I'm from Europe, I don't know how many people were here from Europe. As soon as I heard that I was a professor from Leiden, I had a really high expectation because here in Europe, at least from Italy, we think that Leiden University is really high standard, especially for PhD. But I was not disappointed. The presentation was really, really nice. So thank you. Yeah, on a personal point of view, I've been this year, I guess, 4 times in Den Haag, but not yet in Leiden. I'm super close, almost 1 hour, but I've never been, not yet. Hopefully, as soon as they open, I will go. So anyway, the presentation was really nice since as an international relations student, we are studying how, why some actors are important or how much are they important, which role do they have, but not why on an historical perspective, from an historical perspective. So this is why it was really interesting. And I have this question since me, myself, in the future, I cannot still define whether to work on an official, so governmental level, public level, or on a private, in the private sector, so on a private level. So in your opinion right now, how are actually official diplomats and citizen diplomats, or the diplomats working right now? Are they cooperating, or there is, for example, citizen diplomats that are doing what actually official diplomats cannot do, since they have to follow governmental rules, governmental interest? As diplomats for an embassy, for example, they're not free to say whatever they want or to do whatever they want, rather to follow specific requirement. Rather, for example, a private NGO is more free to act in this sense. So.
Thank you, Rosella, and you're always welcome in The Hague. So look forward to the day when we can all travel. Yes, I think to give you a direct answer, some in the field of diplomatic studies talk about, in the last couple of decades, they've talked about the necessity for diplomats to change their role, to really understand that they are network builders, that they are, in a way, catalytic converters, that because of their status and credibility, they do have the potential to bring networks of people together to address a particular issue, and therefore hopefully raise the chances of achieving a positive result. And that this is quite different from the traditional understanding of diplomats, who would be more bound to a particular space, be it embassy and its immediate environment, and who may not be really kind of going out to really discover more about what's possible in the host nation. So there is, a definite awareness throughout foreign ministries, and I think there are some people in the audience today who could say quite a bit about this, about the requirement that diplomats should be more visible, that they should be more able to attract attention and basically explain and justify what they're doing. And one of the ways would be exactly to invest in the kind of professional capital that's out there that can show that they're addressing social problems and social issues. So yeah, the role of diplomats has definitely changed, and I think the pressures on diplomats have increased for that reason as well, to try and deliver results. So yeah, that's a very interesting question. Yeah.
Others who were or are diplomats want to chime in here? Eve, you need to unmute.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for your presentation. Mm, I have been a diplomat here in Washington for more than 15 years. And
Remind us from the Democratic Republic of Congo?
Republic of Congo, yes. So I'm learning every day. And I know about multi-track diplomacy because I'm a member of multi-track diplomacy, and the founder of multi-track diplomacy died last year, Ambassador McDonald's. The truth is the world has been changed. And when I started this field, diplomatic issue cannot go on social networking. You see today, if a leader makes a statement on a Twitter, it becomes official. But this did not exist before. But Rosella raised a very important things when we are talking about the multi-track diplomacy. We have our normal diplomacy in the office at the embassy. Is totally different with the way we deal with other diplomacy. So, but technology, globalization, the issue of climate change has changed the way things should be. So we are learning now new style of how to deal diplomatically, but it became very challenging. That is what I want to add. Thank you so much.
Yves, can you clarify what's your particular role within the embassy? Are you a public diplomacy officer? Are you a political officer? What kind of role do you play in the embassy?
Exactly. So, yes, that is a good question. So, that is the common questions I receive from students from everywhere I go. What do you do? That is not easy question, but what I know is a good diplomat must know how to transmit, how to research, to analyze, and to give back. Give back is to send information to your country. But with the technology now, is not easy. Is not easy. What we need to do is travel a lot. In case of writing, sending, is good to take a flight, go there and deliver. So to answer your question, I do everything. If they told me to clean, I will clean. If they told me to report, I'll report. So I don't have really specific duties, but I try to do everything. Our embassy is not a big embassy like Russia, like China. We are only few diplomats, and we must be polyvalent to do anything is available for the interest of your country. And that is what I'm doing. Thank you.
Great, and thank you for joining us. It's good to have professional diplomats in this in on this conversation. Brian, I think you raised your hand to contribute to this.
Yes, I was just going to say that's a different kind of multi-track diplomacy where you're doing everything in the office there. But my question actually was for Linda. I was just wondering what kind of interaction that your organization has had with other youth diplomacy initiatives, say like Seeds of Peace, or just what is your relation to other leadership development programs in citizen diplomacy at the youth level?
And Brian, before Linda answers, can you just briefly identify yourself?
Yeah, I'm Brian Smith. I live in DC. I'm an educator. I work in the Episcopal Church, and I'm actually also trying to get a business started to sort of create a forum for various initiatives like this. But that's down the road. Educator is just basic title for now.
Gotcha. Linda?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I'm glad you mentioned that because one of the things that I really am passionate about is getting people to collaborate and not duplicate efforts. So the first thing that I did was try to figure out who's already in the space of engaging youth on global issues and try to partner with them and collaborate and support their efforts and try to complement. So, one of the first things we did is identify, I met with a guy named Scott Reckler that founded Learn Serve International. He came out of Ashoka, and he and I pulled together a bunch of youth organizations working in Washington, D.C. to see if we could just learn from each other had a small living room collab. But you know, so I scour the world for global organizations and try to get in touch and partner where it makes sense, and also promote those organizations. The one I'm working with Global Change Makers. It's based in Switzerland. We're working with World Savvy, who focuses on teachers. We're working a lot with the UN and the youth groups there, the major group on children and youth. We're working with domestic DC, DMV youth organizations like LearnServe and others. So we're trying to partner and complement, but I don't know if that answers your question, Brian. I'm also an Episcopalian, St. Mark's, Capitol Hill, and I would love to engage. I've talked with groups that do Palestinian Israeli work. I'm always trying to reach out to different youth-oriented groups to.
Is that Josh Thomas?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I talked to Josh Thomas.
That's good. No, that's good. And I guess, Paul, your group is youth-based as well, the Learning Initiative, right? I mean, that's
so we have an international mentoring program. Actually, Linda and I have spoken about possibility of collaboration, and it is definitely in my mind of going forward with our international mentoring program. We're in the process of kind of revising it, but the possibility is for our international mentees to participate in the groups that Linda has started. So that's across the world. In fact, that was going to be a follow-up question I had for her, but she and I can talk at some other time. You guys don't get to talk with her as often. So sorry, Brian, did you have a follow-up to that? Okay. So we have a couple of questions from others. You're welcome. Goldnar, then Julie.
Hi, I'm Golnar Abedin from here in Washington, D.C. I just first had a comment. I loved your presentation, Linda. I talk a lot about universal design. I'm also an educator, and the presentation format itself with the videos and everything was really nice. But also your idea, and I was just wondering if you could share more about how you went from where you started to kind of this more concrete idea of engaging teens with the SDGs, because in education, we talk about innovation a lot, and I really love this idea, but I didn't know how you what your process was to getting there. If you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, I'll make it really quick. It was slow. I left my job in frustration with the lack of collaboration among my sector. I focused on global science diplomacy. And I'd love to talk about North Korea at some point, about what we're doing there with science engagement. But the whole idea was to get people in small living room gatherings to be able to that we're passionate about solving problems. And then out of that came a focus on youth. And out of that came this video contest idea of empowering teens to pursue their dreams and be change makers. And then we sort of decided to latch onto the UN SDGs as our framework about 2 years into the video contest. And about 5 years ago, we decided to try to connect youth in virtual rooms. So we've been working in virtual rooms with youth for 4 or 5 years. It's very hard because we don't go through schools. So we have time zone challenges. I'm sure you guys all know this. So problems with internet with our teens from Nigeria and different places across the world. It's been an evolving thing. We've sort of just, and then the Smithsonian got interested and wanted to engage youth, and we have partnered with them. And now we're working with affiliate museums across the US. But really what we're trying to do is get teenagers to come into rooms where teens are in charge and they're supported by adults for action, because there's so many things they can do. So I would love to talk more with you about your interests and background, and anybody else here who feels strongly about empowering youth.
I love it. Thank you for sharing.
Just one kind of challenge to us who are in the citizen diplomacy practice sector, which is it's one thing for youth and others who are enthusiastic to get involved in kind of little projects that they create, and they produce a video or some sort of arts presentation. It's another thing to connect them to a movement which has some sort of a direction with a set of goals, and so I guess that to me, I think, is more significant. I think it's awesome. There are organizations like IRN, you guys, some of you might have heard of, who get students involved in all kinds of little projects. But I think to the extent that we're able to connect youth to power in particular, and get them involved in some sort of social movement where their small actions are contributing to a larger whole, and ideally set of timeline goals, I think it has the potential of much more impact. So it's just a thought.
Paul, my background's in the policy world, so that was my idea originally, was trying to connect them. The challenge I've found is that a lot of older people and networks don't want to engage teenagers. I mean, there's teens that want to get involved, but so part of what my challenge is, so we bring them to the United Nations. We now have them leading an initiative with Amazon, they're putting together a reusable to-go box. So if you go to the restaurants down in National Landing in Arlington, you'll hopefully in a year start seeing the results of our plastics hub teams. And there's a number of other examples, but you're right. I mean, there's things like, they can be lobbying obviously on climate change. We are trying to figure out how we can get them connected to existing policy organizations that might care about hunger and get the teens to get involved in their outreach and campaigns on policy around hunger. Yeah. Or plastic pollution, or pick whatever, mental health.
Yep. Yep. And so we have just a couple more minutes. So I want to, there are a couple of other people that have questions. I think we're going to have to stop after Julie and then Constantine, and then we'll have to stop this interesting conversation. Julie.
Hi, my name is Julie Moyes, and I'm a retired Foreign Service officer. My last job was teaching cultural affairs tradecraft for the State Department. And one thing I found surprising, and this may be a subject that we can get into on another day, but the fact is that I was going through the chat and noticed a lot of people are getting degrees in cultural diplomacy, and there are teachers and professors in cultural diplomacy. And I didn't, that's not anything I was aware of, because the students I was teaching, a lot of them had master's degrees in international relations. So I think the whole subject of education in terms of cultural diplomacy is an interesting topic, and maybe it's something we can take a look at another day. I know you rush, so let's talk about that some other time. But just an observation that I'm interested in how we're teaching cultural diplomacy now.
Julie, if I remember correctly, you're actually one of our speakers for our April meeting. So maybe that could be part of your presentation.
Yeah, let's talk about it then.
Okay, all right. Any thoughts on what Julie just mentioned about kind of the fact that, well, Rosella is part of I know that she's part of a cultural diplomacy program, if not a school, I can't remember. But any thoughts about this kind of the growth of cultural diplomacy and the fact that there are a number of people here engaged in it, either as students or scholars?
I can just chip in very briefly. I think you're right, Julie. I think you can see this. There was the journal Place Branding and Public Diplomacy, which was started a few years ago. And certainly at the master's level, I think we have definitely seen a growth, more on the international relations side than the historical side. But I mean, I have several colleagues in the Netherlands who have a lot of student interest in, say, cultural diplomacy during the Cold War, say. So yeah, I think you're right. I think it's a very vibrant field.
Interesting. Thanks, Chuck.
Let's turn to Constantine.
Hello, everyone. I'm Constantin. I'm from Romania. I'm an educator, but I also work a lot, let's say, in the Brussels environment, because I'm the vice president of a network called Volunteer Europe, which works a lot on the concept of active citizenship. And my question is for Giles, and the question is, how clear is the line between diplomacy efforts undertaken by certain stakeholders and lobbying activities? I think, for example, even at bigger like worldwide NGOs, let's say like Greenpeace or Amnesty International, who also represent legitimate interests of citizens, of regular citizens from various countries in a way, but also to other big players in the world and even economical entities that sometimes the activities they do could be defined as lobbying, but is there also a diplomacy component? Because many times the influence and impact they have can affect states as well. So this is basically my question. Is there a clear line, or is this line between lobbying and diplomacy sometimes fluid? Thank you.
That's a great question, and yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, the best I can do is to say I think diplomacy at the end of the day should be representing bigger interests than simply profit, say. So that if we take a CEO and we say, okay, this person is involving in diplomatic activities, there must be something more there than simply arranging a contract for their big corporation. And that is still not clear cut, because of course, how can you tell? Maybe there's just a smokescreen of good intentions to achieve the profit, but that would be my kind of immediate response. So it's you can make a distinction, I think, but it's a very good question.
Thank you.
All right. I want to thank our presenters once again for their presentations. I much appreciate that you had PowerPoints that were engaging, and then you kept to your time, and you offered some interesting insights into your own work. So we're going to switch, and I'm going to share my screen to the last part of our meeting, which is briefly, very briefly, I'm going to be telling you a little bit about these bylaws. Bylaws are probably the last thing you all want to be talking about for an organization, but nonetheless, the purpose here is to try to some extent formalize our operations or a process, and elect some officers for the CDRG. And so I've drafted these bylaws, which are now available in the Google folder, and by the name CDRG bylaws. And they include some membership definitions. What I want to emphasize here, of course, you'll have access to this, and we're not going to finalize this until next meeting. The idea is next meeting will be kind of some time devoted to discussion and then finalizing this, and then the meeting after elections. So we're going to delay elections just so that we have enough time to kind of proceed through this and give people due time to read and discuss. But I just want to highlight a couple of things here before we move on. One of them is about a definition for members, between a member and a voting member. So because we want this network to be as open as possible, we want to give everybody the opportunity to participate in the meetings and to present. And in order to do those things, you do not have to do anything other than join us and volunteer to present. And it's at no charge. However, for those who wish to be involved either as officers or who wish to take part in voting decisions, like for instance, approving bylaws and approving officers, the proposal here is to reserve that for people who are actually dues-paying members of the Public Diplomacy Council. I want to remind you all that this affinity group, the CDRG, is actually a part of the Public Diplomacy Council, which is a US-based public diplomacy organization. And so we want to encourage people to join as dues-paying members. And there are certainly benefits to that. And there is a link, in fact, here if you want to learn more about the Public Diplomacy Council. So that's one distinction. And then I just want to note the officer roles. So I've been so far this past year doing all of the work with the help of volunteers, including Rosella Vulcano, who's going to be speaking after me. But the three roles or officer positions are a meeting chair, a membership chair, and a communications chair. So the details are there. And then there's just details about the officer election and terms. I would like this to become 2-year rather than 1-year officer terms, just because it's kind of a pain in the ass, to be honest, to have to do elections every year. But of course, we can have people replaced as if somebody steps down. And then a procedure basically for revising the CDRG bylaws with a 2/3 majority vote of voting members. So that is, in essence, that information. Are there any questions about that? About the bylaws? Again, I want to emphasize you'll have the opportunity, and I will repost to the email list the full bylaws, so you can write any comments and so on. But any questions about that at this point? So, and also keep in mind, so we'll be making the decisions on the bylaws at the next meeting. And everybody will be able to participate in that discussion, regardless of whether or not you're a dues-paying member of the Public Diplomacy Council or PDC. Okay, if there are no other questions about that, I'm going to turn it over to Rosella, who is going to present briefly the CD Bulletin. The CD Bulletin is the Citizen Diplomacy Bulletin, something we started last year. With every meeting, we have a new bulletin which tries to present some of the articles, the books, the initiatives that are going on out there in the world in citizen diplomacy. So go ahead, Rosella.
I'm gonna share my screen. Just a second, my computer is a bit. Okay.
While that's loading, I want to emphasize to all of you that the bulletin is actually open to announcements. So in fact, if you have announcements that you want to include in the next bulletin, you can put them in the chat now that you would like included in the bulletin. This bulletin will go out to people. There's a larger group of people. We have, I think, about close to 200 people in our Facebook group, and then we have over 200 people in our LinkedIn group, and those are not exactly the same populations. So this is an opportunity to get your initiatives out there. So Linda, among others, I encourage you to kind of post something if you have an invitation of some kind.
Okay,
Rosella?
Can you see my screen now? Okay, thank you. So in the last year, we witnessed a constant rising of nationalism from, for instance, the nationalistic policies of Donald Trump to Brexit, from the nationalistic policies of the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to his Indian counterpart Modi, to Turkey with Erdogan. Furthermore, in Europe, we have witnessed even a constant rising of consensus for far-right parties, especially in the last elections, specifically, especially in Italy, Germany, and Austria, but it's generally in all Europe. And when media speak about raising of nationalism, they are speaking about rising of a trend that is likely to lead to protectionism, isolationism, and xenophobia. And for this reason, for this bulletin, we wanted to focus to a couple of initiatives that rose in order to still promoting against this protectionism, isolationism, and xenophobia, still promoting intercultural bridges. And so citizen diplomacy, and those are, for instance, civil society against right-wing extremism, and STAR, standing together against racism in Europe. Then now we can move the announcement, and as Paul already said, if you have some announcement to include in the next bulletin, you can just email me here and with the detail, and I will be happy to display whatever you have to announce next time. So for now, we have the Fulbright Schumann program, which is keen on promoting and provides funding for exchange programs, and specifically for European and US exchange programs, and is going to fully fund an exchange program for European students who are willing to study in the US. And for the application, just take a look at the website. Every name, blue name, are just linked directly with the website, so you just have to click on it for having more information about the application. Then we have the Kim Kam-Hill on Educating Responsible Global Leaders, which is an online event held by Citizen Diplomacy International, which is a website that hosts different events on a weekly basis, and for this reason is highly recommended to follow up. Then we have the Council of Europe Development Bank, which has announced a grant for projects who are addressing current social issues, and the grant is around 25,000 euro, and the application deadline is in April. For more information regarding the format of the project, for example, please just take a look at the website. That, as I said, the link is already in the bulletin. Then the last one, we have Cultural Wizard, which has announced new courses. Culture Wizard is an online platform dedicated to high standard e-learning on online courses for cultural integration. And in this case, there are courses about cultural integration regarding professional environment and workplace. For the demo or more information, as always, just click on the website. So now we can go to our articles.
And Rosella, if you can just highlight a couple of articles and books, just to be brief.
Definitely, yeah, I will be more brief than the announcement. So we have some articles that are adopting storytellings for speaking about citizen diplomacy, other more academic approach, even as we said, we saw, for example, today. So we had a more academic approach and a more practical approach. Then we have even books that address current and future trends regarding international relations and citizen diplomacy. And then lastly, we have our helpful sources that even we utilized in order to keep updated with citizen diplomacy's matter, but even international relations matter. So this is all. So I try to be brief as possible. So thank you for listening.
Wonderful. Thanks, Rosella. Thanks for pulling this together with me. Again, you're welcome to not just events and announcements, but if you happen to also have recent publications or organizations that you'd like to recommend for our resources page, because those are the last two pages for citizen diplomats. They have to be citizen diplomacy related and ideally have a kind of treasure trove of resources or free information for people. So please feel free to submit that. In the last 10 minutes, we've got announcements. So we want to open it up to everybody. I will start off shamelessly with an announcement here that I'm posting in the chat. Which is that we are now recruiting volunteer family diplomats and family diplomacy ambassadors in preparation for 6 live dialogues, live international family dialogues that are going to occur between June and November of this year, one dialogue per month, focused on the question, what do families worldwide need to be safe and healthy? And so each dialogue will focus on a different aspect of that question. So I encourage you, if you're interested, click on, or if you know people who might be interested, young people in particular, to click that link to find out more about what it means to be a family diplomat or a family diplomacy ambassador. In essence, the family diplomats are going to be participating in the dialogues with at least one member of their family. And the family diplomacy ambassadors are a growing team, international team, mostly young people who are helping to recruit the family diplomats to participate in those dialogues. So it's a lot of lingo, but that's what's going on. And we welcome new FDs, new family diplomats and family diplomacy ambassadors. Anybody else? Linda, did you want to say something about, you posted something in the chat here about promoting science engagement?
Oh, I think I sent that to you, but at any rate,
I'm sorry.
Okay. No, we're working on a documentary that will highlight engagement on science. I started a consortium between the US and North Korea to engage university researchers in science, and worked on that for about 8 years. But this documentary highlights a lot of different people-to-people exchanges with North Korea in particularly science, including the volcanology research that's been led out of the United Kingdom. And the scientists that lead that are in the documentary as well. It's a short 30-minute documentary. We're hoping to get into classrooms as a way to start getting students to talk about engagement as a strategy, people-to-people exchanges and engagement. So it's totally, would love to share that at some point.
Yep, great. Other announcements?
And we do have masks for sale. Our teens are making masks on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and I put the link in. And we'd love any organizations that want to promote masks with great messages about climate change and mental health and all sorts of topics.
Awesome. Others, new publications, initiatives, projects, programs?
Hi, everyone. I put a few event announcements, all virtual, all free, that are for me come at the intersection of my work in diaspora diplomacy, city/county diplomacy, and also public diplomacy, really, at large. So they're all involving these ethnic advisory groups that we have in Montgomery County, which is just outside DC in Maryland. And we are a minority county, and there are ethnic advisory groups under the county executive's office for pretty much any world geographic region. It's a lot of fun. It gets into all kinds of squishy, analytically unclear boundaries that Giles talked about, and certainly involves a lot of youth. I have a bundle of wonderful high school interns. Thanks.
Debbie, by the way, thank you again for your help with kind of drafting the bylaws. Debbie's been helping. I think your official title is vice chair, right, of this group, and so Debbie's been helping in a variety of ways, including that. Other comments, questions, announcements? Elizabeth.
Hi, I'm Liz Colton, and I teach for UNITAR, the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, and also the Open University of Catalonia, master's programs in international affairs and diplomacy, but I focus on public diplomacy and and cultural diplomacy, but I always talk about citizen diplomacy. Yesterday, I gave a talk that is actually aimed for citizen diplomats as well, or regular diplomats, anybody, about the relationship between the media and news media and diplomacy, and with a lot of tips for getting your stories out. I've been a journalist for many years and also a diplomat and a professor of this. So if I don't have the link on hand, but I think you'll be able to get it. It's actually recorded on UNITAR's Facebook. It's at UNITAR HQ headquarters, I guess. And you can listen to that there. Thank you so much for having me. This was a great program. I loved hearing everybody.
Thanks, Liz. Liz, you mentioned posting to, or we were in discussion about posting to LinkedIn and our Facebook groups. If you're not able to do that, you can forward me the information, and then I can forward it to one of our interns who will post it to LinkedIn or Facebook.
Okay. All right. I will. Thank you.
Great. Other announcements? We've got space for one more announcement. Stefan, do you want to? I don't know if Stefan is still paying attention, but speaking of kind of metro diplomacy, Stefan has been involved in that. I don't know if you want to speak very briefly about what you're up to with the Global Diplomacy Lab. And he's in Romania, and I don't know if his connection is good enough. I hope it is. We can't hear you, Stefan.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, excellent, super. So, hello everyone. My name is Stefan. I come from Romania, from the Făgăraș Research Institute, and I'm also teaching international development at Babeș-Bolyai University. And one of our projects relates to diplomacy and communities. What we're trying to do is to maybe go beyond the more traditional approach of city diplomacy to look at communities and diplomacy, and within that to look at how various stakeholders from that compose communities actually are relevant in diplomacy. So basically we have a lab where we will be looking at diaspora and diplomacy, and also at social entrepreneurs and diplomacy. As well as the connection to the Sustainable Development Goals. So yeah, this is it in a nutshell. We can come back with further news once we organize the lab.
Right, and I've spoken with Stefan about presenting, I think, at our June meeting. So we've got, so that's, I guess, brings us to thanks Stefan for that. But so our next meeting, FYI, is on April 6th. That is a Tuesday, April 6th at 9 a.m. Eastern. So that's New York, Washington, D.C. time. And then we have not actually set our meetings for June and then beyond, but that will be announced, I think, at the next meeting. I have to talk with Debbie and try to figure that stuff out. One of the challenges, of course, is trying to reach people in the Eastern time zones. You'll notice that the vast majority of us are, in fact, I think all of us are in Africa, Europe, and North or South America. Yeah, there are some people who want to participate in Eastern time zones, and it may require, I don't exactly know how we solve that without alienating at the same time the people who are in these Western time zones. So anyway, I want to thank everybody for, we're at 2:30. I want to thank everybody for your time and your attention and your participation, particularly to our two presenters, Giles and Linda. And look forward to seeing you all at the next meeting. Oh, and we will be posting, as usual, a recording of this meeting, all the chat and else to the wider list, which is now approaching over, I think we're approaching 500 people on the email list. So we keep growing, and there'll be a report on that and where those people come from. All right, everybody. Thank you all. Bye.
Thanks, Paul. Bye-bye.